subcommittee. The meeting is being live streamed and recorded, and the recording will be made available on the council website for public listening. Could I remind members, as usual, to follow the good practice guidance, which including muting microphones and switching off videos when not speaking. Should you wish to contribute to any item, you should write speak in the Teams chat function, and it would actually be helpful if members attending in person could use their phones or iPads to write speak in the chat function as well. If anybody has already raised the question or the issue that you want to speak about, please withdraw your request. Please ensure that for complete transparency, there is no material posted in the chat function, which is in fact a contribution to the debate and should therefore be shared in the discussion. The usual standing orders apply, not that we tend to vote in this subcommittee. If any member has to leave the meeting for any reason, please either leave the Teams meeting for that period of time or write leave in the Teams chat function and then join when you rejoin the meeting, which will allow us to record member presence and ensure that the meeting is quorate at all times. And I think that particular instruction has sometimes been forgotten in recent meetings. There's been one or two meetings when votes have been called and people haven't been there. So I think they've maybe left the meeting and then forgotten to tell us they've left the meeting. So it would be helpful. Also ensures that if there is a vote that we can try and make sure that we contact the person and record their vote accordingly. Nick, can you provide the sederant and any apologies, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, in the hall we have Councillor Scobie and Councillor Thompson. All other members of the subcommittee, excluding Councillor Wilson at the moment, are present on Teams, unless he's just joined. I'll just double check. Can't see him there, so all are present, bar Councillor Adam Wilson at the moment.
Thanks, Nick, and I confirm my agreement to the participation of all of us who are participating remotely. Do any members have a declaration of interest they wish to make? Okay, it would appear not. So we go on to item 3, the COVID Response, Renewal and Recovery Report by the Chief Officer. This report provides details of the current position in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic and the Council's activities. Taking cognizance of feedback from members at the last meeting of the subcommittee, the report has been structured in the distinct areas of engagement, workforce pressures and response updates, including infection rates, vaccination and community testing programmes. Kirsty Peden, Annie Johnson and Richard Greaveson are all available to assist members with any questions. Is there anything you want to add, Richard?
Thank you, Leader. Good afternoon, members. Just a couple of quick updates since the report was written. The first one relates to workforce members, where at 3.22 of the report, we talk about the pilot event, which was scheduled for yesterday. I'm happy to update members that that event went very well, specific to the health and social care workforce pressures. We had over 30 attendees on the day, and we've managed to make 18 conditional offers of employment, which we hope will obviously go some way to resulting in additional colleagues joining the team and alleviating some of the workforce pressures that we've got in the health and social care setting. We've got additional events that are scheduled within the next 4 to 6 weeks across the region, as we have with the council events, which are all scheduled for week commencing the 8th of November. And we'll be able to provide more details should members wish in terms of that those specific recruitment events. In terms of the numbers, the update, Leader, there's one more update, weekly update since the report was written. Pleased to confirm the numbers remain on the right trajectory, slightly lower in terms of infection rates, and a really good positive picture continues in terms of vaccinations and the community testing programme. But as you say, Leader, obviously Kirsty's joined us in terms of the engagement programme. Myself and Annie are also here, happy to take questions through yourself, Leader.
Thank you. Councillor Scobie.
Thank you, Chair. Just to follow on from what Richard, and thanking him for his further update on the report, just want to focus on a couple of things here. And firstly, first point is to 3.12, workforce, where there's been a workforce task group established to provide focus on addressing these challenges. I just wonder about homelessness, and again in terms of social work, in respect of delayed discharges. That are on the increase, or I believe they are on the increase, and they're exceptionally high across the country, where they're just below 6,000. I think we've got an exceptionally high number. But just talking on the homelessness just now, and I just wonder if the task force are looking at accommodation, because we, with the pandemic and everything else, we're seeing an increase in homelessness, but we don't seem to have suitable accommodation to meet the needs of those that are finding themselves homeless, and they're finding themselves having to be allocated or accommodated 50 and more miles away. So I just wonder if, you know, the task force are looking at that, and what solutions are they coming up with in terms of accommodation. And I'll come on to the delayed discharge in terms of social work, because in 3.16 it refers to recruitment challenges within care and home services. And I heard Richard saying that there was a positive outcome of recruitment yesterday in recruiting by 18 members, or offers being made to 18 people in health and social care. And I hope that's in the care sector. And if we compare those 18 to, I believe, a statement made, and I think the statement was made on record, where Jeff Hayes, the Chief Executive, said that if he could do anything, he would employ 100 care workers. So that 18 is nowhere near the figure that he announced he would, if he could do anything, he would employ 100 care workers. So I just wonder what more effort we could do with the task force working through this, because it does highlight the pressure in health and social care in terms of the unmet need, which only means that we're going to have further delayed discharges, and how challenging the significance of trying to employ care workers. So it's to try and get a handle on just how serious this is, both in terms of delayed discharge, proper and sufficient care packages, to also people who are at home needing care, who have not entered the system of being hospitalised. And just for members' interest, I was on a call this morning, and I'm no name dropping, but it was with Humza Yusuf. And Humza has made an announcement, or was about to make an announcement, where he's making £300 million available across Scotland. Now, you know, whether that's anything near enough as to what is needed, but if it's the case that 18 into 100 as what is needed, and I'm sure it's a lot higher, if we can make a plea for that part of that 300 million to come towards recruiting in the care sector, and making every effort to make sure that we can recruit as many as possible. Thank you, Chair.
Derek, I see Derek's got his hand up. I don't know whether you want to take that question, Derek.
Thank you, Leader. Afternoon, colleagues, members. Take the initial part in relation to homelessness and allow Richard to come in and the others. But just in terms of homelessness, quite clearly, we're very grateful to Richard and the team in terms of the workforce task group, because clearly in relation to the recruitment of additional homeless staff, that is a priority for this council, and we're quite clear of the importance of it. So the workforce is focusing on the recruitment of the staff, and to assure all members that that is clearly highly prioritised. However, I do acknowledge the point made by Councillor Scobie in relation to accommodation, and it's just to assure members that we regularly report to Communities Committee, and at the last meeting we acknowledged that over the last 18 months we have had to make considerably additional more accommodation available in light of the increased homelessness we're experiencing. The positive news is that we are making that accommodation available, first and foremost, so people are not rough sleeping. However, we do recognise that it may not necessarily be the best options for those people in those circumstances. So it's to assure members, firstly, the accommodation issue is something that the team are dealing with to ensure as best we can that we present the best options available to people in these circumstances. And as a minimum, we are achieving that because, as I say, there is accommodation available. However, we aspire to ensure that's available in a location and of a standard of the highest quality to reflect the needs of homeless people. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. Richard?
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, Councillor Scobie, I think it's fair to say that the significant recognition of the impact of suitable care packages being available and the relation that has to the delayed discharge agenda that you mentioned. And it's for these reasons that through discussions within the partnership and indeed through the Strategic Resilience Partnership, that this task group approach was suggested and indeed was thereafter actioned. So, you know, we recognise that there's real pressure here. I think colleagues in the NHS are also quoted that there's around 3,500 hours of unmet demand each week at the moment. And that's obviously unprecedented in terms of the challenges that they currently face. And as a consequence, you know, we've taken this fast-track recruitment approach across the region. The pilot event yesterday was just that. It was the first of many events that we hope to have across the region that will start to eat into some of the needs and requirements in terms of that service. It was a real multi-agency approach yesterday from NHS colleagues, from CAS colleagues specific to the service, and colleagues from across the council, having had a look at various issues and potential barriers as to why you know, we might not have as many people applying for these type of roles as we might like, and we've looked to tweak and adjust the likes of person specifications and job descriptions where appropriate to make these jobs as appealing as possible. And in terms of the numbers of people, you know, as I said, it's a start. If you look at 3,500 hours of unmet demand over and above the core staffing establishment, inclusive of vacancies, that's probably around 100 staff. So I would think, well, that you know, full-time staff, that's where Jeff probably got to with that number. But we continue to sort of work on that multi-agency approach. I think yesterday was a really solid start. We'll have those additional events right the way across the region and really look to build up that cohort of staff that will go directly into that service and help to address this pressure. Thank you, Leader.
Can I come back?
Willie, do you want that?
Yeah, and thank both for that response, Derek, in terms of the accommodation, and I hope that we are successful, given the pressures, and particularly in Stranraer and Dumfries, as I understand them. So hopefully we can come up with a solution in terms of the accommodation, and also to Richard for the efforts that are being put in. But I think as politicians, as elected members, I think we've got to be doing our part as well. So, Chair, when it comes to 2.4, rather than just noting the current position on the announcement that 300 million is going to be made available, I think we've got to highlight just how serious the situation is in Dumfries and Galloway, and in that respect, writing to the Health Minister, just outlining where the difficulties are and the need that we've got in this area, whether that's for extra resources or indeed means to recruit. So I think we should be doing that under 2.4 rather than just noting the situation.
Can I say, Councillor Scobie, that I'm probably the last person who should write to whom say yourself, considering the man doesn't like me. You know, so a letter from me would probably not
I'll write on your behalf as long as it comes in noted paper.
Right, so I certainly not got a good response from him in the past, and he doesn't like me, so he doesn't like my friends. So but I think we can make representations, but I honestly believe that they'd be best not with my name at the bottom of them. I'll call Councillor Davidson, please. Oh, sorry.
Thanks, Leader. Is it me? It is, isn't it? Leader, you're muted.
Sorry, I said Lorna has her hand up, so I don't know whether she wanted to respond to the earlier point, Rob, before I bring you in.
Thank you. It was just on the point about additional funding and Councillor Scobie's mention of the Cabinet Secretary for Health. Obviously, there's been recent announcements about additional funding to support pressures, including pressures on care and other aspects of health and social care as well. And we would expect to have some advice through from the Health and Social Care Partnership to the IJB and out to the Council as well about the funding that's been allocated to Dumfries and Galloway systems and how that can be applied, and recommendations about how that can be used. So that additional funding is already in the pipe in a sense, and perhaps it'd be helpful to get an update on that to members from Julie White before maybe addressing any later to the Cabinet Secretary on that information.
Thanks. Rob?
Thanks, Leader. And I think that further update would be useful because resource will only be part of the issue. I mean, if I've read this report correctly, we have budgeted posts which we cannot fill. It's not that the council is short of money; it's that we are short of applicants. So that certainly is what I take from this. More resource is important, but we also need to understand what the barriers to recruitment are. And it was actually on that point I was looking at 320 and 321, which I do think make a lot of sense, because clearly the situation we're in is such that we wish to get people who are interested in joining us started work quickly. But obviously the checks that we have in ordinary circumstances are there for a reason. So I wanted to check, and I mean, I presume I know the answer to this question, but I wanted to check that it has been, risk assessed and that any identified risk is mitigated in terms of making that change, as set out in 320 and 321. Thanks, Leader.
Richard?
Yeah, thank you, Leader, through you. Thanks to Councillor Davidson. Yes, happy to confirm that all the appropriate risk assessment has been considered. All the changes have been done through colleague Mike Shepley's team in terms of human resources, and obviously in terms of care inspectorate colleagues and colleagues in CAS, and to ensure that all the appropriate checks and balances that we would require to be in place are indeed there and continue to be covered. So yes, happy to confirm that that's the case.
Rob, anything further?
No, I think that's very helpful, Leader. I guess I suppose the follow-up is that clearly we'll want to keep a close eye on this, and as Lorna has referred to, I think benefit from further information on this as it develops. My instinct is that this is potentially quite complicated, and I'm not sure there'll be one single straightforward solution to it. So I'm assuming that we'll continue to get updates on this as the situation develops. Clearly, we hope improves in fairly short order, but at the very least to keep an eye on how things are going.
Thanks. Councillor Thompson.
Thanks, Leader. So I've got a number of questions, if that's okay. I'll do the ones relating to the first part of the report. I've got a few other ones just to do with Section 4 under the response, where it's talking about testing and vaccinations. But could I just ask, I don't know if this would fit maybe under 3.3, but in terms of community conversations and community engagement, I think elected members and communities are now starting to see the resurgence, if you like, of community councils meeting again. Some are meeting in Village Hall, some are still operating on Zoom, for example. Some will maybe have certain restrictions in place depending on the venue, but I think could I maybe ask that there's maybe an updated briefing goes out so that community councils are clear what guidance they're meant to follow, maybe from our community council support team, and elected members are aware of that as well, because it will vary from place to place depending on the situation and the various risks, etc. But I think it would maybe provide a bit of comfort and certainty to people as they're trying to get started again. So it's maybe just a wee request for that from the relevant team. But I've got a few other points just in the first part of the report. Based on the staff discussion and the attempts to recruit staff in various posts, in 3.12, would it be possible, maybe not today, but just circulated for the members of the committee, what the breakdown is by department? There's a few listed there. Obviously, health and social care is the priority, but there are other teams there as well. I mean, we must be talking, a few hundred staff or vacancies that we're running with across the council due to, early retirements or people taking other positions or whatever. And even if we fill those, there's probably still an additional need, as Councillor Scobie pointed out, that we would need on top of that to meet the demand and the various productivity impacts with people having to take isolation or take themselves out of circulation. So there's a kind of need which is to fill the vacancies, and then there's probably an additional need to do with the circumstances we're in at the moment. So if a wee bit of detail could be provided on that. But going back to the sections on the council's priorities and budget. So you're looking here at 3.7, and this is responses from the engagements we've had so far. I do wonder if we could maybe get a bit more detail circulated at the appropriate time on what the individual responses are in terms of what the council could do less of or stop doing or do differently, but also what people want to see in the future. There's things in there which actually are, the heavy lifting has maybe now been done by the enterprise agency, for example, or might be done by our partners in health, or D&G PLC, as they might say. So I think it'd be helpful to know what we can actually influence as a council, as opposed to what we directly impact upon. Because we're one of many players on this stage now. So while people might tell us that they want the council to do this or that, it might be our housing association partners that do it, or the NHS, or SOSE, or another agency that we can influence at a different table. So I think that'll do for now, but then I've got a few questions for vaccinations and testing at section 4, if that's okay. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, Richard, do you want to take that, or Kirsty?
Happy to take a couple of those points, if that's okay, Leader. Perhaps just to come back to Councillor Thompson on the request for an updated briefing to community councils. Yep, certainly on our monthly newsletter, which all community councils receive, and indeed periodically in between, we always include some sort of reference to the current guidance that needs to be followed in terms of meetings. And we are very aware, as you've highlighted, that there's a variety of different approaches being taken. I suppose the good news is that we know that at least 2/3 of our 86 community councils are indeed meeting, and within that there's a variety of platforms they're using or hybrid models, although some are indeed meeting in person. We are certainly working with the RRR team in terms of looking at the guidance as it changes to ensure that community councils have access to good information, are adhering to the national guidance, and we're also planning in the next 2 weeks, I think in middle of November, there is some safety training which will include risk assessments, because for many of the facilities they need to hire, they are indeed requested to complete a risk assessment, and obviously we want them to have the skills and confidence to do that. But happy to look at a kind of best practice sheet, which is possibly maybe a bit more accessible for community councillors to use and to get that out to them. If I could just pick up your comments in relation to the responses so far. Report highlights that obviously at this point in time it's just a high level summary, particularly on the RRR themes, which is that information about where people want to see going forward from what they want for the future. And obviously we'll come back to full council in December with the sort of full detail of information, which I think is what you're looking for there, Councillor Thompson. And also to reassure you that the Community Planning Exec Group gets an update on that feedback from the engagement, and also the Community Planning Partnership Board have already shown an interest in the findings of the engagement programme, and so we'd be keen to share that with them once we've brought that to members in December. And obviously that could then feed in to the Community Planning Partnership Recovery Plan, which is of course the Dumfries and Galloway PLC, as you've suggested, approach. And so the engagement findings could be reflected as that plan itself is updated and refreshed. That's helpful. Thank you.
Just on the breakdown of staff needs by department, I don't know if there's any information today on that.
Richard?
Yeah, thank you, Leader. Thanks, Councillor Thompson. So the focus for the task group has been what we've called prioritised posts. So we looked at the number of vacancies. We looked at where there are significant pressures across services at the moment as a consequence of direct and non-direct COVID absences. And we provided a breakdown for the senior leadership team. Thereafter, we prioritised 101 what we called business critical posts. And they are very much the focus of the fast track approach. So that's how we're moving forward on that. They include a range of different individuals: cleaners, catering, facilities assistants, HGV drivers, homeless officers, roads operatives, to senior social workers, etc. So we're looking at a whole range of different approaches, not just the recruitment event, to target those posts. But happy to provide additional details to members in that regard. But that's really the focus for the task group, is those business critical, those priority posts. Thank you, Leader.
Thanks, Richard. Stephen, you had some more questions about vaccination.
Yeah, if you're okay for me to do that now, it was really just questions on, when we're talking about staff, obviously staff at care homes and care at home staff are interested in getting their boosters across the region. Many of them are not employed by this council, but they operate for the people in our communities. So when will they be, how and who will be telling them when and where they'll be getting their vaccinations? I know we did get a sort of chart showing a rollout at a recent sort of health and social care seminar, but I don't know how tightly that's been adhered to. But down at a local level, I'm getting, constituent level reports sort of asking, well, we've not been contacted yet, or shouldn't we have been prioritised first, and when's that happening? Now, I appreciate some of these were due to start from 18th of October, but I don't know how quickly that's getting rolled out, or if there's any impediments to that. And it's really just a plea that, is there a way we can join forces with the NHS or the vaccination teams so that whatever we communicate, NHS is communicating, and vice versa, because this is a shared area of interest, and it might be that we have our own CAS teams, as it were, direct employees that are wanting their vaccinations and boosters, and also for the wider social care workforce, they'll be wanting or needing those boosters as well to reduce the risk on the people they're looking after. So it's really just, where can we get that information, and is there a wee table we could get telling us when and where, so we can cascade that out to the relevant members of the community. Thank you.
Richard, is that for yourself, or would Annie answer that one?
Yeah, no, I can start, Leader, through you. Conscious that colleagues in the NHS have received requests for information from elected members in this regard, and there's been some information circulated today, along with a press release, which Councillor Thompson, I think, will get a copy of. Certainly, from our perspective, the programme's progressing in line with the recommendations set out by the JCVI, and as such, all care home residents and care staff in the region have been provided with the opportunity for the booster vaccinations, subject to any temporary site-specific COVID restrictions, and they've been taking place within that health and social care staff setting. As of today, 62% of people aged 70 and over in the region have received their COVID-19 booster, compared to an average nationally, which is significantly lower than that. So I think the booster programme is working well. I'm happy to feedback the comments made by Councillor Thompson to colleagues in the NHS and see if we can provide some additional data. I would say that this is still very much, whilst it's an NHS responsibility, clearly, there's very much a multi-agency approach in terms of the approach we've taken to venues and/or comms, but happy to obviously have further discussions and see where we can continue to improve moving forward. But as I say, there should be additional information coming out to members in response to requests this afternoon, and indeed the general comms around testing and vaccinations, and I know is also coming out from NHS this afternoon.
Just to quickly come back, I welcome that, and I have seen my inbox has been populated now with some responses just as this committee is happening. But in terms of like members of the public now, when you send out emails or press releases, the thing is that if you're not interested in them on that day, then they just go into yesterday's news kind of thing. So I'm just sort of wondering, will there be something on the NHS or the council website, for example, that's there in perpetuity, so that when people do want to know, there's a go-to place they can just say, oh, right, that my vaccination's due in the week starting 1st of November, for example, rather than fishing back through a press release that they may or may not have looked at the time. I'm just trying to think of the user interface, if you like, in terms of how people actually respond to these sorts of things. Thank you.
Richard? I know it's an NHS responsibility, but maybe something you can feed back to them.
Happy to feed that back, Leader. Obviously, as I say, we are in constant dialogue with colleagues. It's obviously complex in terms of how the programme is taken forward, and in terms of peaks and troughs of in terms of demand, and also workforce pressures that we've talked about in terms of the NHS, and that obviously impacts on their vaccination programme as well. But obviously, I'm happy to take those comments back and see how we can build on that through you, Leader. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Richard. Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Leader. I apologise, I was slightly late for the meeting. I think there was obviously a conversation earlier on, and Councillor Scobie suggested about writing a letter, and I'm not opposed to us writing a letter. I think just one thing is I would urge a little bit of caution. I think that it's quite clear we are taking a multi-agency approach, and I don't think that we should unilaterally write. I also think it's quite clear that across the whole of Scotland, indeed across the whole of the UK and many other countries, actually, there is a workforce pressure, and quite simply vacancies are not being filled, and I can see that some of the action that we are taking in this region in that multi-agency approach is being mirrored elsewhere, which tells me that actually there's a really fast-moving situation. It is playing out all across the country, and actually I think that in terms of lobbying government, we need to be quite clear on what we need from government to enable us to fix this issue. And to be honest, I imagine that what we need is what the other local authorities and other health board areas will be needing, and because I can see that they are already taking similar action as to what we are taking. My particular question, though, is around some of the workforce pressure, and I think it's quite clear, we're seeing not just in the public sector, but in the private sector and the third sector, there is a little bit of obviously the sort of response to COVID has now been going on since, in many cases since January last year, but for everybody else since March last year. And it is now getting to that point of, a mix of still responding to COVID. Obviously, continues to be a significant number of new cases on a daily basis, and self-isolate. And the impacts that causes, but also, just getting to a point of, some fatigue. A lot of people went without a lot of breaks, and I'm just wondering, I think that this is certainly probably we're going to be in this situation till past the winter, and I think that everybody accepts that. So, in terms of the list that is provided in if I'm on the right page, that is, on 3.12 and on page 3, there's a number of services there. I'm interested to know, what is the risk between now and, sort of spring next year of us, as a council, seriously struggling to fulfil and to run services, particularly statutory services? I'm just wondering sort of what work has been done around that. I'm aware that, as we approach winter and some of our winter preparedness, quite often we do see services being extremely flexible to deal with bad weather and other incidents. But I'm just wondering sort of what work is being done around the risk, and if there was to be a 5 or 10% sort of absence within particular services, sort of where are we at serious risk of being unable to fulfil services, and therefore need to really think about how we, and come up with extremely creative ways to make sure that the bins are getting picked up, or whatever service it is.
Richard?
Yeah, thanks, Leader. I'll kick off in general terms, if I may, and I don't know whether Derek wants to maybe come in terms of some of those specific areas and examples, but certainly a lot of the work we've been taking forward in terms of the task group reflects that immediacy, and particularly the pressures of winter, as Councillor Wilson has said, for all the reasons that you quite rightly said, Councillor Wilson, in terms of the direct and non-direct issues in terms of COVID, and the pressure that we've been under for quite some period of time. I think it's fair to say that all services have shown a great deal of flexibility and creativity thus far in addressing the challenges that we've had. We've looked across the workforce, as you know, and we've retrained staff, we've redirected staff where there's a requirement to do so in order to keep what we've called these lifeline services continuing. And we've done that in as wider approach as possible in terms of the community sort of engagement and involvement, as well as the sort of sector approach for health and social care, and it'll obviously be a key theme for the Community Planning Executive Board and the Community Planning team tomorrow as well. So I think it's fair to say that the response and the development of the task group and the work that we've done thus far is in a recognition of the challenges we're currently facing, but also trying to plan for the forthcoming period of what will be no doubt a real challenge for us, recognising that staff are already going above and beyond in terms of flexibility and creativity and redirection. But I don't know whether Derek wants to add a wee bit more in terms of some of the services that you've mentioned there. Thank you.
Derek?
Yeah, thanks, Leader. Thanks, Richard, and thanks, Councillor Wilson. Very much managing the risk across the whole council. I don't think it's specific to any one part of the council, either services or geographical area. It's a common issue across the whole organisation, and that's why, under the leadership of Lorna and Director Economy and Resources remit, that we established the workforce grouping, because we recognise we all need to lend support and give the focus this requires, and proactively manage the risk to mitigate the worst impacts. What I would say is Richard's very much articulated the actions we've taken, and the 90% of that is the willingness of our staff to be flexible and to be agile in terms of our ask of them. And I can't praise that enough as being the biggest part of this response is the flexibility and agility of our staff, and need to acknowledge that quite comprehensively as we do as a council. I think the other part to recognise is that we have a part to play in, and that is that we need to show the kindness that we all showed during our response to COVID, and therefore demonstrate that increased level of tolerance, both as managers, as elected members, and indeed as members of the public, that some things won't happen as quickly as we would like to. Some things might have to stop in a short term for unforeseen circumstances, and that kindness that people were demonstrating in an abundance and clapping key workers for that period of time, there is an element where we now need to act in that way that recognises, because we have stopped something, it's because something of a greater risk and higher priority has had to be done, and on that basis we really need people to be more understanding of that, and to recognise that there is no intention of not doing something. There is a recognition, there is an intention to manage the risk, mitigate the worst impact, and prioritise those most at risk, those most vulnerable in our communities. And as a senior leadership team, we're very clear of the requirement to do that and committed to doing it. So hopefully that gives the necessary assurance that to all intent and purposes, the intention is to continue to deliver those lifeline services, but with the flexibility and agility of staff being a key part of this success, which they are due considerable praise and recognition for. Thank you.
Thanks, Derek. Adam, do you want back?
Yeah, thank you, Leader. And I think, I completely echo the sentiments there. I think, what Derek has essentially said is that, as is always the case, is our staff that is keeping our services going. But as we all are, our staff are human beings with their own needs and emotions, and who have been going above and beyond for a considerable period of time. And it's completely understandable. I don't often say this, but we are only in October and have a considerable length of time to get through what is likely to be a long winter. So I completely echo those sentiments. And I think that there is something about being clear with the public as well, that some services may have to temporarily close to keep some other extremely if to keep our schools open, to keep our bins being picked up. Some other services may have to close on a short-term basis, depending on that. But I completely agree. I think there's a role for all of us to play in making sure that our staff are valued and supported, because if we want to get through this winter, we absolutely rely on our staff, and we should never forget that.
Thanks. Councillor Scobie wants back in. Councillor Scobie.
Yeah, so just on the back of what Adam was talking about there, I was going to come in on under 3.11. But before that, can I assure Councillor Wills and Adam that I was not suggesting that we take a unilateral position on writing to government. And likewise, I took the advice as proffered by Lorna Meehan, that we need to know what resources are coming into the area. And as an example, whether 18 of our require or what is estimated to be required 100 staff or care workers is going to be any near to the resources that we get from central government. And I only need to example of the ambulances, where in Stranraer the army was used, but I don't think we are going to get any resources coming our way in terms of ambulances, and yet people are waiting 7-8 hours for an ambulance. So I think we need to be there and be ready to be putting in our responses and to be lobbying government if the resources fall short of what is required. And rather than waiting, I would hope on the advice for Lorna that we'd be in a position, along with our partners in Health and Social Care Partnership, to be lobbying the government should the resources not be sufficient. So that would be my recommendation, or I hope I don't need to go to a motion when we come to the recommendations. Just on the point that Adam does raise and supporting what he's saying, where I'm no precious, I think in terms of what Derek was saying, yes, tolerance and kindness for the community, of course we've got to look for that. But I think we need to know what services are going to be affected, so that we as members can at least advise or be there to answer any questions on it. Because, I was only on another call this morning or this afternoon where it's not just frontline, but it's support services as well, where an assurance that we would provide the flood prevention scheme in January may have to be put back. Now, the people that may suffer the effect of flooding aren't going to be too tolerant or be too kind if their properties are flooded and they had to be evacuated. I'm hoping that we can put in mitigating circumstances, and the issue is for another committee, and I'm sure I'll have conversation with Derek on this, but we need to know what services are going to be most affected, frontline, whether it's through support services affecting the front line. I think if we had some indication of what services are going to be likely to be affected, because I can assure you that the Council's reputation will be at risk in terms of the flood prevention scheme in Stranraer. However much it came about through COVID, that's when the tolerance and kindness is then tested. It's against that and people being flooded. So I do recognise what Derek's saying, and we all recognise, but I think we've got to be in the position to know what services are going to be affected, if any, and what mitigating circumstances were taken.
Okay. Derek or Richard, do you want to come back on?
Happy to come back in, Leader, and just at this stage indicate that in reality the vast majority of services at any given time will be affected. That's the harsh reality of what we are dealing with, and hence why we're indicating that we need to ensure that, as we've indicated today, that everybody is aware of the scale of the problem, but nonetheless, clearly, if it was helpful for elected members to get an indication just to some of the specifics around that, we're happy to provide that. But what I would stress is that, as has been indicated, it's not just about frontline, it's not just about back office, it's about the whole council is experiencing this situation. So therefore, what I would ask members to take away from today is that we're giving you this indication that there is a direct impact on virtually all of our services, and what you've got before you is that initial prioritisation process that Richard and the team are working on. But I certainly wouldn't underestimate the scale of the issue across the whole organisation. Thank you.
Thank Councillor Ferguson.
Thanks very much, Leader. And just excuse me, just to echo what Derek said there, the virus doesn't differentiate between different grades or blocks of staff, and I think we need to be really careful about what information we actually put out in terms of is it a reasonable response for public information. Having said that, I'm picking up some of Stephen Thompson said earlier about the new press release has just come out about vaccinations. There's something missing from it, Richard, that maybe we could be taken back to our colleagues in the NHS, is that the AstraZeneca is not being used for the booster. So therefore, it's the booster is having to be delivered at areas where they can keep the vaccine at minus 70 degrees. So that's why they're having to go to Mountain Hall, a lot of people, rather than people who are not on the housebound list, and the district nursing service is taking stuff out of them. We really need to get the message out to people here. Just exactly what the obstacles are, the hurdles are that we've got. We've done fantastically well already. Personal terms, I had my booster and my flu jab very recently, and it literally was in its 15, 16 minutes or so. And that includes sitting for 15 minutes to come back to make sure there's no reaction. But I'm just wondering if we could maybe have a wee word with Rod Edgar and company and say, don't just be clinical in your press release. You know, tell the public what they need to know. They'll understand. That was the thing Derek was talking about earlier. We got the message out during the height of the pandemic. People understood. They did things they wouldn't normally do, wouldn't normally accept. And I just think we're maybe not being as open as we could be in some areas, and in other areas we need to be careful not just to scaremonger, because well, we just don't know who's not going to turn up on any specific day. And that, I would suggest that picture will change on a daily basis. So it would be extremely difficult, I would suggest, to get out. You would only get a photo snap of a particular moment in time, and it would be out of date the minute you printed it. So I don't know how we're going to get around that, but I think we need to spend a bit more time on our communication.
Richard, again, it's something to feed back to the NHS, really, isn't it? But I think it's a good point about it being the Pfizer vaccine, because I think people look at the number of vaccinations you get total every day, saying how many vaccines have been administered across Scotland, and people will look at that and say, well, how come they can't get on with the booster vaccination programme faster? But it isn't always the same vaccine that's being used.
I'm happy to feedback those points, Leader. It's a fine balance, and certainly the detail contained within goes beyond my professional competence. So I'll certainly feed those comments back in terms of the comms. No problem. Thank you.
Councillor Johnston.
Thank you, Leader. I'm going back to the recruitment drive and the 18 staff and the rolling out of these roadshows. And I think the request is made for further information about what sectors people were in. But what I was kind of a bit concerned about here is how many of these people are new to the sector. I'm thinking particularly about social care, because I get a bit concerned that all we're going to end up with is displacement from other organisations providing similar services, and if that's the case, then we're not actually going forward. So it'd be good to know how many people were actually new to that sector, and has there been any sort of impact assessment done if we end up poaching staff from similar organisations?
Richard.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. Thanks, Councillor Johnson. Really good questions, and something that we've been really taking on board in terms of the planning of these events, ensuring that we're engaging with our partners in the private sector and treating this as a sector-wide initiative, as opposed to something that's specific and solely for the internal CAST team. In fact, that very question was asked of the colleagues that were taking forward the event yesterday. And I haven't got the exact number, but what I was told was that the vast majority of the 18 are brand new members of staff to the sector, and indeed some members of staff whom had come to the day who were already engaged in the sector with other providers weren't appointed, and on that premise that we're doing this as a partnership approach across the piece. The forthcoming events that we've got planned across the region, the private sector will be in the room. They'll be invited to be part of the whole comms message and the recruitment drive with us. Because you're absolutely right, Councillor Johnson. There is absolutely no point in robbing Peter to pay Paul, and we're all fishing from the same pond, so to speak. So it's about new bodies. It's about new people into the service, and that's been the drive from the start.
Thanks, Malcolm.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Richard. That's very reassuring to hear, because as in common with a lot of other local businesses, we're in the middle of a recruitment crisis as well. I know how hard it is out there to get people, so that's quite reassuring to hear.
Thanks. I'm not seeing anybody else indicating that they wish to speak. So if we go to the recommendations, we're asked to note 2.1 and 2.2 to agree to report going to FPT for relating to the costs associated with the council workload pressures and the recruitment process, and also to note the current position in terms of response activity. Now, Councillor Scobie had a suggestion about open, but seems to be gremlins somewhere.
Yeah, Chair, do you mind me coming in?
Yeah, okay.
No, it was just on 2.4, taking into consideration what Adam says, and I'm not asking for a unilateral position. I think we need to work with our partners in the health and social care sector, or the health sector anyway. And just on barriers to recruitment, of course we need to look at what the barriers are to recruitment, but some of these might be through the availability of resources. And once we know, as the advice being given by Lorna, what we might get out of the announcement, whether it's 300 million or more, then we would be in a better position. I've exampled the 18 out of 100 required for in the home care sector, and it's how we do this. But we've got to be in a position, or at least be ready, should it be required, to lobby the Health Secretary and Scottish Government if that money falls short. And it's that position of being ready to lobby should the resources that we may receive fall short of what is needed, rather than waiting. I think that this committee could be in the, or subcommittee could be in the position to agree that and to instruct that. So that's what I would be moving, Chair.
Yeah, I have to say, my view would be that the lobbying might be better done by the Health and Social Care Partnership, because it is actually a Health and Social Care Partnership responsibility. And if there is lobbying to be done, rather than looking as if we're being gremlin.
Chair, whether it's done by us or the Health and Social Care Partnership, just, you know, I'm no thing, you know, on it. I'm no on that. But if it's us, it's theirs. But we need to do it together, and that's where it's not unilateral, and that we're in the position to do it when we've got the information. And it's to that point that we note it, we agree it here, and it can go. We are part of the Health and Social Care Partnership. The Council's social work is part of that. So I think we've got to play our part. And if we're ready, we can then do it, rather than waiting on another committee to agree it or whatever. And I know there's a process in lobbying, but if we could agree it, it starts the process.
I'm afraid I'm not quite sure what it is you want then. What you're asking us to agree today.
Chair, that we find out, as Lorna has indicated, we find out what we might get from whatever additional resources are going to be made available. And as I say, this morning, this afternoon, it was 300 million that the Health Secretary is making available. We find out what that may be in that settlement, in that extra money that's being made available. If it falls well short, and already the example I've given is for the Chief Executive of the NHS saying if he could do anything, he would employ 100 care workers. So, and we are sitting at 18, so we know that there's a shortfall in there. And we can look at where the shortfalls are. If the resources don't meet that, then we would be in the position then to lobby the Scottish Government, laying out what the circumstances are in Dumfries and Galloway. That's what I'm asking in the recommendation.
Lorna, do
An attempt to be helpful, Leader. Part of the issue we have in posts isn't financial. We have extra money for COVID in the council, and obviously Health and Social Care have received extra money through COVID as well. The fundamental issue is the availability of a workforce and staff with the requisite abilities and capabilities and available, and that's across all sectors. I was speaking to a private sector employer to the region who is desperately seeking candidates for well-paid jobs. So it's not particular to any sector, and it generally doesn't seem to be a financial issue. But notwithstanding the winter pressures and the winter planning money that's been announced by government for health and social care, the Chief Officer for Health and Social Care with the Health and Social Care Partnership is assessing the plans for the application of that, and I've asked her, subject to members' agreement today, to also look at the sufficiency and the assessment of that additional funding. But we already had funding for a number of vacant posts within our own budgets for health and social care, which is part of the pursuit of the staffing we have. So I would imagine that Julie will advise the Integrated Joint Board on that additional monies and the sufficiency of them, and indeed the application plans for that money in very short course. So asking her to share that information with members of the council so you can see that also. And also I would suggest that the IGB would wish to take a view about the sufficiency of that based on the advice from those officers. We don't have that at hand at the moment, but if we share that information with you, and obviously the IGB will be making an assessment around that and the way forward in terms of the application of that money. Yes, to address care requirements, and Richard's explained the levels of care need, but also in terms of the winter pressures within the health and social care systems, which always come about at this time of year as well. So there's a whole range of application of funding within the winter planning money that the Cabinet Secretary announced. So we'll give that to members through Julie, and we'll pick, obviously Julie will pick any of that up with the IGB as a partner there. The council members are part of that, and if there's anything that's requiring further weight from the council, or the council indeed takes a view on that, we'll take direction from members on that. But the first thing I think is to get that information to members as it becomes available, and we can take it from there.
Thanks. I've got Councillor Wilson and Councillor Ferguson wanted to get back in. Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, no, just to be, I mean, I'm sure none of us want to be sitting here for a couple of hours discussing the recommendations on what's a fairly straightforward point. So I don't know if, you know, the way I see it is that, you know, we're in a fast-moving situation. You know, as a local authority, we are trying a number of different avenues to try and fix this issue. And, you know, certainly from what I can see, the actions that this local authority and indeed the NHS are taking are not too dissimilar to what's being taken elsewhere. So I don't know if maybe even just agree in a form of words of agree to carry out coordinated lobbying with external agencies and partners where appropriate would be sufficient, because I think that would kind of touch on sort of where Willie's coming from. But I think also sends a clear signal from this subcommittee that, you know, if there is issues that arise during this fast-moving situation, that, you know, we can coordinate that lobbying with external agencies and partner organisations to lobby for, you know, what I see as, you know, maybe support, resources, advice from government that we need, that we may need, and of course we're learning every day in this situation. And hopefully that is helpful and can maybe be supported.
And Councillor Ferguson.
Okay. I suppose I'm just intrigued by Wally's new bestie, Hamza. With the best will in the world, he can maybe find something in a biscuit tin in terms of cash, but he certainly can't find 100 members of staff. And I think Lorna put it very, very well. Whilst we'd obviously always accept extra financial resources, the problem here isn't a financial resource, it's a human resource. So Adam's interjection there at the end actually makes a bit of sense, because we're needing to start lobbying for more places at college. We're starting to start lobbying for more places at university. We're needing to start that process now. It's not going to cure the current predicament, but it's the start, at least on the road to recovery, which is what we should be aiming for here. So I'd be willing to go along with what Adam said, to the extent is that we need to start looking at the people who train, right? The other employers, lobby everybody, right? By all means, yes, but with the best will in the world, there's no cabinet secretary, be that in London or Edinburgh, who's got 100 plus members of staff for us just to parachute in and we can put them straight away to work. That's just not going to happen. They're just not there. So we just need to be, I think, sensible about the whole approach. And I think what I'm getting around to here is that it should be a two-pronged approach. Do what we can in the short term, but then lobby about the longer term. That, for me, is a bigger issue than the short term. I'm really worried about the future because people just aren't training for these jobs.
Thanks. Well, I see Councillor Scobie wants back in, but I'm personally quite content to accept Councillor Wilson's recommendation or additional recommendation. I'll go back to Councillor Scobie and then we're going to finish this particular item because we've been on it for an hour. Councillor Scobie.
Thank you, Chair, and I can assure I've put no inverture into the friendship with Humza for Andy's benefit. I can remain an opponent but still be friendly with the guy, but he was clear as to what we were wanting from an action group this morning. Along the same lines as what Adam was coming up with, I had something written down that should lobbying be required, that the Council will work with partners in lobbying for any resources required. So it's along the same lines. I'm quite happy to accept what Adam's coming forward with. It's on the same vein.
Excellent. So are we happy to agree the recommendations with that addition that Adam suggested? Everybody content with that? Good. So that's grand. And then we have a final item, which is a report on Response, Renewal and Recovery. which provides an opportunity for members to consider and discuss the Scottish Government's COVID recovery strategy and how its vision and outcomes may impact and influence our local considerations in Dumfries and Galloway. And can I just say I have to go for a medical appointment at 3:45, so if the meeting's still going on there, I'll hand over to Rob to chair the rest of the meeting. Okay, Richard, I think it's Annie and Richard who assisting us with this. So, Richard, is there anything further you want to add?
I think just to say, Leader, that I think the strategy recognises and builds on a number of areas that are already underway in terms of our planning in Dumfries and Galloway, both in terms of the work that we're doing with the community planning partnership and the executive group, and indeed the council's own internal recovery strategy. But I think I'm really keen to hear members' views in terms of the document, and obviously I'll then take that on board and try and influence and shape the two local recovery pieces of work that are ongoing at the moment to reflect those views, Leader. So happy to take comments. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Scobie and Councillor Wilson. Willie.
Yeah, Chair, welcome the document. And just on the last point that Andy made in the previous discussion debate, I've looked through this and I'm looking to see if I can find anything to do with future planning in terms of what is required. Now, we should have been doing it 20 years ago. In terms of doctors and nurses, we now know that there's a huge shortage in childcare, and while we could not repair it for tomorrow, let's make sure we can repair it for years to come in terms of the training and perhaps the upgrading of care workers to professional status, because they're not, they're maybe not to the level of a nurse, but they are almost the equivalent in cases. So in the document and long-term strategy, I'm looking for that employability, and I see there's parts in here for childcare. It's to look at that we've got a strategy that does for years to come in terms of recruitment in doctors, nurses, home care workers.
Thanks, Richard.
Thanks, Leader. Thanks, Councillor Scobie. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And clearly, in terms of the documentation that we're developing, in terms of refocusing our recovery through the community planning partnership, employment opportunities and career development is critical in terms of the key themes. So again, thank you for your comments. I'll make sure that we feed those back and they feature in those documents as well.
Adam.
Thanks, Leader. I think I'm sort of looking at page 22 and three nice graphics. I think actually, to me, I see realistically our sort of 5 council priorities on that page, just sort of worded in a different way. And obviously the following pages go on to talk about some of the Scottish Government's commitments following on. And there are many I agree with, some that I don't agree with, and some that I question whether they will happen, but that's by the by. I think what is quite clear from this document is that we're able to see sort of over the next 5 years, where might the gaps appear for us and for people in Dumfries and Galloway. And what I would be quite keen for the RRR team to do is to really think about what that gap is between what, we here in Dumfries and Galloway need and what some of our specific challenges and issues are, some of which we've spent a considerable period of time this afternoon discussing, thinking about, and then actually looking at, where is the gap and what are some of the solutions that could therefore be provided. Because, I am quite clear that actually the outcomes that are there on figure 3 are not too dissimilar to what we're trying to achieve as a council. And therefore, it's about how we can make sure that we are making the best use of our resources to fill that gap. And also, as well, working across our community planning partners and other public agencies in delivering those. So I think that that's a piece of work that I would quite like to see running in tandem with this. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard.
No, welcome those comments. Thanks, Councillor Wilson. And certainly in terms of that sort of collective endeavour and that multi-agency approach, the work we've been doing thus far is to start looking at those gaps and what the solutions are, and taking, as I say, a multi-agency approach and taking that forward. So no, very happy to include that and take that forward and on that basis. Thank you.
Rob.
Thanks, Leader. Couple of things. Firstly, with regard to paragraphs 5, 6 and 5, 7 in the covering report, the references to outcomes, indicators, monitoring and evaluation, which I think is really important. But I think the critical thing with it is that ideally it enables us to have, I don't know, what would the best way of describing it be? Almost a dashboard of things that members here can look at and say, here are the things we set out to achieve, and we agreed these in partnership with everybody else that has an interest in this. And here's how they're going. You know, this is the stuff that's working, and here's the things that aren't. Because actually a lot of the previous debate about, is it a resource issue, as in a financial resource issue, or is it first and foremost an availability of people issue, for example, will be much easier to address if we've got that sort of local feedback and that kind of local data loop almost. Because if it's simply gathering an exercise for gathering data that goes up to the improvement service in the government, then okay, that's, I suppose, fine so far as it goes, but it won't help us to do what I think this strategy wants us to do, which is to continue to work together much as we did when we perceived that there was an absolute clear and present danger to the lives of the people we serve. And you know, to what extent that was well, very fortunately in this region did not come to pass. Of course it did in others, much more severely than here. We certainly did that, and we did it successfully. That leads me on to the second point, which is that while I agree that structurally the community planning partnership is the right place to do this, I would slightly question whether, and I'm only doing it because I'm not sure, rather than because of a clear indication, I slightly question whether we are all necessarily as organisations operating and working in just quite that same manner. Maybe that is too much to ask, in fairness, because it involves a tempo and a focus which is difficult to keep up for the long term. But I wonder, because this is a paper for discussion, I think it is a point for discussion, you know, to what extent are we all collectively really managing to continue with that approach? I think the strategy encourages us to do that. I think it's the right thing to do. I hope other folk would agree. I wonder, in terms of being caught up in the day-to-day pressures that all of our organisations have, to what extent we're actually still doing it in the way that we were. I suspect that's probably enough to be going on with. Although I suppose the final point, again, and I'm maybe too hard on the community planning partnership, but I have in the past felt that when we were grappling with large issues, and so the one that we discussed as a partnership for some time about depopulation and actually the impact that that's having on the availability of a working age population to support essential services, going back to our first point. I think we all concluded as a community planning partnership that would be a really good thing to get our teeth into. And I'm not sure to what extent we ever did. In fairness, it was overtaken by events. You know, we ended up with a massive national public health emergency. But even before that, I'm not sure just how much we had managed to achieve collectively. So I think it's a real litmus test for how useful community planning partnerships actually are. And that, I guess, is the final of my 3 points, and probably is the one which is more of a question. How will we ensure that we've got a clear line of sight from the stuff that we do here, the work we do here, and the decisions we make as members, up to the community planning partnership and back down again? Because I think perhaps there is sometimes a feeling that it's a bit at a remove, the one from the other. So I guess 2 points and half a question, but in fairness, Leader, it is a discussion paper, so I'm doing my best to be provocative. Thank you.
Thanks. Richard.
Thanks, Leader. Thanks, Councillor Davison. I'll try and take them each in turn. I think whilst we're expecting in probably in December some kind of performance framework and national recovery targets, I think at that point we'll be able to see the value of the work that we've undertaken to date in Dumfries and Galloway, and that is continuing in terms of where the current gaps that have been identified by ourselves will fit in that national framework, and whereby, as a consequence, we'll require to augment that document with Dumfries and Galloway specific issues and challenges that we'll clearly need to take forward underneath that umbrella of recovery, so to speak. I think that I go back to again that work that we've looked at now in terms of those calls to action that were developed by the Social Renewal Advisory Board, and that whole "if not now, when" agenda, which was discussed in some detail by the exec group and indeed at community planning board meetings, where there seemed to me to be a commitment that, as a consequence of COVID and indeed the whole recovery agenda, allowed and provided for an opportunity for a refocused approach from partners around that table. And if we've got a document such as this that aligns with the national strategy for Dumfries and Galloway, as well as our own internal council document, which looks at not only how we can do things differently and learn from the way we've delivered services over the past 2 years, how we can build that into the sort of budget model, and indeed, as Lorna was saying yesterday, both sides of the coin, both in terms of budget pressures that brings with it, as we've talked about today in some areas, but also opportunities to create efficiencies as a consequence of doing things differently. I think we're in a reasonable place in order for those conversations to start. And as I say, I think from a community planning perspective, I've certainly sensed a commitment to continuing with the partnership that served us so well for the past 2 years and building that into business as usual in true community planning style, as opposed to individual agencies reporting on individual areas and pieces of work that might have areas of crossover, but actually getting into the meat and planning around how we make best use of joint resources to meet a common theme and a common outcome. So I think they're really good points, Councillor Davison. I'll feed them back through CPEG and and take it forward on that basis. But thank you.
Thanks. Just sort of on that, I think we have certainly tried to change the way in which the CPP board operates, but I do actually have a little bit of a concern, though there's a lot of sort of agreement to it. Actually, when it comes to the board, there's a bit of a difficulty in engaging board members with it. And I don't know how we crack that one. I think some of it is about operating online and so on, but I certainly felt that, I didn't feel a lot of engagement from some of the members of the board. I've got Andy and Stephen. Andy.
Thanks very much, Leader. I'm back to this old hobby horse again. It's the elitist approach to training places. And if you look at page 34, and it's got there, more recently there's an evidence of labour shortages across the economy, e.g. SGV drivers, hospitality. For goodness sake, there's been a shortage of doctors and nurses for years. But the elitist, the number of places that train where these different occupations train is controlled to make it to keep it elitist. I would much rather have a survey of so that we exported nurses and doctors if that was the case, rather than us have to import them. There's nothing in here at all in that whole section about good green jobs and fair work, about how we're going to change the way that we allocate training places for people who want to be nurses, doctors, physios, whatever it might be. There's nothing in there about that at all. And if you just take it back, to give you a kind of an example, is that Richard and I had this discussion many years ago now. It was when we put in some highly qualified coaches into schools. It wasn't classed as a quality educational experience because they didn't have a teaching certificate, but they had years and years and years of international experience in coaching. Right, so, and I see Gillian's respond to that as well. So I don't know how we get around this and whether the community plan partnership, I've raised it there before. We really need to have a look at how we allocate places in Scotland to train people that we need. We really do, and we need to take away the elitism because it is there. It's maybe hidden, but it's there. Be interesting to see what either Gillian or Richard has to say on that.
That document is a national document rather than a local document, but that doesn't mean to say I don't agree with you. In fact, I noticed with the draft regional economic partnership action plan, which is just being looked at, there was a mention of the same shortage of work in those areas, and nothing about the shortage of healthcare staff, which is, as you say, an important problem. I've got I don't know if did Gillian want to come back on that, or Richard?
Just through you, Leader, obviously, Councillor Ferguson makes very good points. I think, again, in terms of how we take that forward locally, in terms of identifying the sort of workforce pressures and coming up with our own solutions through that multi-agency collective endeavour approach is probably the answer, albeit I'm not underestimating the scale of the challenge.
That is also something which does need to go back to the Regional Economic Partnership as well, because actually it's something we need to look at on a South of Scotland basis, not just a Dumfries and Galloway basis, but actually I would see it as part of the role of the Regional Economic Partnership, and so is actually to look at how we fill some of these gaps, which, as Andy says, are very long-standing. But Stephen, Councillor Thompson, please, Stephen.
Thanks, Leader. Yeah, I think the document itself, obviously that's a Scottish Government publication, and there's a few things in there. I don't know if we need to pay a little bit of attention to the page 30, the universal, the rights of the child legislation. Obviously that's been in the press for a number of reasons, but we may want to just reflect on that in terms of how we go forward with that, because that's clearly an area of value, or not in the case of some people who oppose it. But there's also a few things around. I think we should be careful about the use of the words systemic and systematic, because they have very different meanings. So at 3.4, I think what we're trying to say there is that we want to address the systemic inequalities, which is what it says in the document. Clearly, anything to do with a system that's producing inequalities, it means you ultimately have to change the system or transform it in some way so as not to sort of pervade everything that happens, so it delivers inequalities. Systematic's got a slightly more sinister. There's a method and a practice which delivers inequalities, which I think we certainly wouldn't want to be part of that. So that's maybe something to consider and maybe correct. That leads me to think about the nature of community planning partnerships and how easy it is. No sooner have we maybe mentioned in one paragraph about having a person-centred, holistic or whole system approach, then we're dancing off to talk about partnerships and agencies and all the rest of it, and it's like, well, where's the individual in that again? So I think it's a good anchor point to sort of, before we get too carried away with any plan or vision, bring it back to the level of the individual who's going to be affected by the system, the services and the systems that wrap around them when they need them. So I think that's maybe just a way we could monitor our thinking about it, perhaps. But other than that, I think we await further detail, and it'd be good to see more of this when that detail comes back. It certainly will inform the next few years of what we see being delivered nationally and locally. So I welcome the heads up, but I think there's a bit more to come from it. So I don't know if I've got any questions in there, but clearly we should take care over our words, let's say. Thank you.
I suspect that was probably a spell check error, but I'll pass over to Richard.
Thanks, Leader. Thanks, Councillor Thompson, for pointing that out. And as duly noted at the 3.4, I think in terms of the comment about the people, the person-centred approach, whilst we need to consider that within a community, within a multi-agency approach, it's very much the focus and remains the focus. And I would use the the likes of the single access point as the good exemplar, albeit that's only engaging with the sort of 3 multi-agency partners, but it provided that one front door approach for vulnerable individuals to contact or to make contact with us, and we therefore ensured that there was a triage undertaken and that person received the help and support they needed as quickly as possible from whichever was the most appropriate partner to deliver that. So they weren't shipped from pillar to post, so to speak, to try and source and secure the support they needed. So it's that type of approach I think is going to be critical in terms of applying a multi-agency response, but very much driven by the individual person-centred requirements. Thanks, Leader.
Thanks. Ian Carruthers.
Thank you, Leader. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you.
Thank you. Sorry, it's would have been hands-free. I think it's a really interesting point that Councillor Ferguson brings up, and I would keen to see something coming back in regards to that. If we could possibly have seen that. He talks about it being as elitist, and I think there's a high degree of truth and probably evidence behind that as well. I'll put what I'm trying to convey into context for my own industry that I work in. So, if I'm looking for, say, a machine operator that wants to drive or operate, I should say, a large excavator, they've got to have a licence, so to speak, or a ticket, as some people call it, to operate that machine as you would have a driving licence to drive a car or a larger vehicle, whatever it may be. So if somebody's starting from scratch, that'll cost about £5,000 in which to get. So what the industry's recognised, touching on what Councillor Ferguson's saying there, is that there's people with experience who have been on different types of machines, operate and so on and so forth for a number of years, but haven't got that. You could classify it as a degree, but it's not a degree to operate a machine like what I'm talking about. But that certificate says, okay, here, you've been through this and you're qualified. They take on the level of experience now and if that can be demonstrated, so I recently put somebody through that and it reduced it by 80%, the costs, but made it efficient for myself to put somebody who had a lot of experience but didn't have the ticket, so to speak, or the licence to operate that machine. So whether it's a machine operator or an excavator or a dumper, or whether it's a nurse or social worker, there must be ways to fast track people with experience who are sitting there just ready and good to go but haven't got that degree or that ticket, whatever it may be. And I just think it's something we need to. I think that this would be a good conduit in which to progress that if we possibly could. We could get to the bottom of that. I can't see that coming back, Leader. If you can't add that into the recommendation, we see some kind of report coming back on that. Like, I'm sitting pretty dominant, pretty dormant, I would say, actually, sorry, in these committees at the moment, just taking in everything what everybody's saying. But I think this bit's important enough. That's why the reason I've come in here, just to recognise it's something we could all be working on as a council collectively and making real progress, and that would help address a lot of this. It's not just about money, come back to the previous bits that I think Councillor Scobie brought up in particular, and everybody kind of jumped on it. This is not just about money, this is about working in better ways. It's about making a workforce for the whole south of Scotland, but Dumfries and Galloway in particular, fit for purpose, so it addresses the needs that we have, Leader, and I know that you're well aware of that. So if you don't mind, Leader, when you get to recommendations, if you could copy that in, if that's appropriate, I'd much appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, Richard.
Thanks, Leader. Thanks, Councillor Carruthers. I think you're absolutely right. I mean, some of the things we're looking at in terms of the short-term changes and challenges we've got in terms of the workforce issue and what we're doing now to address those. And long conversations with Mike Sheffley and the HR team about which elements thereof need to be considered in a more sustainable way, which is obviously Mike's area of expertise and responsibility, and building that into the future operating models, processes and procedures within the council where appropriate. So, very happy to continue with those discussions with Mike and ensure that, members are updated off the back of the current workforce work that's ongoing and how that can then be built into the process moving forward in a sustainable way.
Thanks. Do you have a particular form of words that you want to suggest for that, Ian?
I'm keen to see a report back that actually emphasises on the point that Andy's bringing up. It's not just about the money here. This is actually about having a workforce that's fit for purpose going forward. Leader. So is that, I mean, I would keen to see a further report explicitly on the points that Andy raised, and I've gave an example of where I think we can fast track the people that we've already got in place, whether they're retired, semi-retired, people with a lot of experience but haven't got that degree, or whatever it may be, and whether that doesn't matter if it's health and social care, so it's across all sectors. It doesn't matter if it's public or private. There's a number of different ways that we can help leaders. So even a report further back, a report that comes back to, I would prefer it to this committee, because this is a very responsive committee. We can act fast in this, reach out to all partners with immediate effect. If we could do that, Leader, I'd be delighted and actually touch base further, and I would imagine other, like Councillor Ferguson and such, like we would like to touch base with the report author, whether that's Richard or Mike Shepley, before, so they get a full understanding of what we're looking for, Leader.
Okay, I mean, I would imagine, as a result of agenda item 3, we would be getting a further report on the workforce issues anyway. I mean, I thought it was one of the things that we'd actually requested. I mean, obviously it's part of this, but it's part of the previous item as well. I thought Councillor Ferguson's comments were more about the national situation and the lack of training of doctors and nurses, which is actually, not something we can sort, or even the NHS here can sort. But there is actually a very important point in there and about the lack of training in people. And also, I would be quite interested to know how that Scott programme where you were actually taking graduates from other disciplines and training them up as rural GPs, and how that's going, because that's one of the considerable issues that we face here, is a lack of GPs as our GPs age and retires. Richard, do you have a feeling for what we might be able to achieve with this?
Yeah, thanks, Leader. I'm happy to work with Mike, and I'll produce an update to the next RRR sub on the workforce task group and the work we've been doing, but also how that then dovetails into sort of potential lessons to be learned and positive changes to future process. But I'll work with Mike on that. Happy to bring that back as part of the next set of papers, Leader.
Thanks. Andy wants to come back in.
Yeah, thanks, Leader. Actually, Ian's actually opened up another avenue to where I was going, because you're right, Leader. I was talking more about the where you've got national criteria set about how many GPs were going to train that year and how many nurses were going to train and blah blah blah. And take that elitist part away. Because we hear every exam time people who are distraught because they got a B, 3 A's and a B, and that wasn't enough to get them into a certain medical school. And whilst, but I take Ian's point that there needs to be a way as well where you can get people who've got significant experience to short track into things. Now, I know they've just done it with teachers, haven't they? They've done it with certain professions. So I think, but I was meaning nationally. You're absolutely right, Leader. Because this is a national consultation. So whilst I agree with Ian's summary about local guys needing HGV tests and specific tickets to drive specific pieces of machinery. I suppose actually it's exactly the same, because that decision doesn't come from local employers. That comes from national legislation. So it's Ian's point is probably quite valid actually. So, but how do we get it into the national review? That's what I'm wondering about. And I'm not sure if Richard could weave that in there.
Richard?
Yeah, thanks, Leader. Just for clarity, I mean, the Scottish Government's COVID recovery strategy document is as you say. It's a national document. I think it's about how we use that to influence and shape how we do things internally moving forward. And I think both Councillor Ferguson and Councillor Carruthers' points are very valid. And as I say, I'll try and have that discussion with colleagues and build that into the model moving forward in terms of our own documentation. Thank you, Leader.
Thanks. Adam?
No, I think just to add, I mean, obviously Councillor Colours gave a very specific example, but I'm sure that many of us are aware of local businesses, particularly in construction, but actually a number of businesses that are struggling to recruit. And I think actually, I think it was in the last report actually that an officer referenced the difficulties within the private sector of actually managing to recruit, and I think it's a equally as important issue, because actually there's a number of local businesses that if they were able to find the qualified staff who could actually grow their business and therefore employ more people locally, which would be a fantastic story for our region, and getting more people into work. So I think that we can find a way, and that's maybe working with the Regional Economic Partnership and with the South Scotland Enterprise Agency, who I know are looking at this issue anyway in many respects and look and see what they can do. But that may be where some of the lobbying comes in around. A number of our local businesses, well, they could grow. They're not sort of cash rich. So it's about how can that there maybe be loans or grants put in place to support training and skills development. And I think that's a conversation that ties in nicely with what both Ian and Andy were saying, and very much fits into that sort of COVID recovery, particularly within the economy and creating high-skilled, high-paid jobs locally.
Thanks. I'm going to ask if I can hand over to Rob now for the rest of the meeting, because I have to get away. Rob, is that okay? Cheers.
Hi, Lydia. Yes, that's absolutely fine. Thank you. Can I just check the list of speakers to make sure that we've got everybody? Last on the electronic list was Adam. Can I check whether anybody else wants to come back in before we go to the recommendations? Willie, is that you trying to get in?
Sorry,
no, thanks, Rob.
Davidson. It's Nick Evans here. Just Councillor Wilson is outstanding on the list, if you like. He's
okay,
just spoken, in fact, I think.
No.
No,
so that...
he's still to speak. Yeah, there's no one else has indicated.
Great, okay. Wanted to make sure I wasn't leaving Willie out. So let me turn to the recommendations. I'm conscious that we may want to look at the wording of this, given the discussion we've just had. At 2.1, I take it we're content that we have considered and discussed the Scottish Government's COVID recovery strategy document and indeed the covering report. So I think we're content with that. At 2.2, we're asked to agree to a further report being presented to this subcommittee once further details of joint oversight, management frameworks and measures of performance and how they will apply locally are available, but it certainly reflects some of the points of discussion. However, I'm very aware that there was further discussion then, I think, about specifics on skills and I guess barriers to training. Would that be a fair summary? I guess. I'm pausing to await correction.
Rob, can I just come in?
Andy, yes, carry on.
Yeah. It was actually the allocation of training places, never mind who's going to get them. So if we're 200 GPs short, why are we training 150? That's the point I was making, right? And that figure doesn't get a rise from the Cabinet Secretary. It arises from the professional bodies who put their minds together and see how many places they're going to support and put in place. God forbid we should have a surfeit of people,
Well, indeed, I think it would be a nice problem to have. Adam, you want to come back in?
I think only to say I'm quite comfortable with the recommendations. We're agreeing for a further report to come back, and I'm sure the officers have captured all the varied points that have been made today. So I'm quite comfortable on the basis that all those points have been jotted down, and even if they haven't, we're being live streamed and recorded. That essentially we look forward to receiving further details on all those varied points in a future report.
You're on mute, Rob.
It's obviously one of those days. It's the first point at which I've actually done that, and I've been in Teams meetings all day. My apologies, colleagues. Okay, so I think I saw Richard nodding about the inclusion of these issues in the further report. Can I just check on the timescales for that in terms of our next scheduled meeting? I think it's early December, is that right? And there is a full council shortly thereafter. So clearly it would allow us the opportunity to be considering and making recommendations for decision and that sort of thing, which is the purpose of this committee. I see Richard nodding again, so that sounds fine. On that basis then, with the assurances we've got in terms of what will be included in that further report, are we happy to go with 2.2 as is? Hear no dissent, so I'll take it that is agreed. Okay, so with that, colleagues, I have no further business. Thank you all very much for your attendance and your contributions, and I'll close the meeting here. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob.